I cannot tell you enough how tempted I was to play Eminem's Guess Who's Back for this sermon, because I'm back 2 weeks in a row, so it was really exciting. And then I also have to apologize, there's no Dungeons and Dragons in this sermon, so I hope you guys will still pay attention. Throughout my sermon today, I want you to think about one question. What does it mean to invest in the gospel without a tangible return? When I was sitting with this question, the events of May 28th, 2020 popped into my head. Just hearing 2020, I'm sure, brings a lot of emotions into your body. We were separated from our communities, we were alone. But not only were we alone, but in Minneapolis, it was under fire. It began on May 26th after the murder of George Floyd. Thousands rallied to peacefully protest, but in the end, the actions of a few became violent. Protesting turned to looting, words became Molotov cocktails, and my city began to look like an apocalyptic hellscape. Unfortunately, peaceful protesters and angry looters all tend to look the same when surrounded by violence. That is why Holy Trinity Lutheran Church set up a first aid station for everyone injured. Rubber bullet wounds, pepper spray victims, and police were all treated in their sanctuaries. I remember Pastor Ingrid Rasmussen and the other staffs telling stories about how they poured gallons of milk in people's eyes to wash away the pepper spray. They say that smell stayed in their sanctuary for weeks afterwards. I guess that is the price for investing in the gospel without tangible return. See, they are kitty corner to the Minneapolis 3rd Police Precinct that was burned down in the evening of May 28th. Even when violence was at their doorstep, that congregation still opened their arms to the countless people who needed help, regardless of intentions. When the dust settled, what was left was a community crying out for help. Holy Trinity and other churches did not hesitate to open their doors, collect resources, and offer aid, because that's what it means to be a part of the body of Christ. Paul, in our text today, reflects on what it means to be in partnership with believers that involve risk. From being the persecutor to now the persecuted, Paul writes to his beloved community, the Philippians, with words of encouragement and gratitude for their partnership with him, knowing the risks involved. It's important to remember a couple things when talking about the letter to the Philippians that fall under the category risks of being involved. First, it is that those who believed in Jesus' resurrection, or were part of the Way, the title they called themselves, were still under the threat of persecution. It isn't until 300 AD, with the Edict of Sardica, that Christians were allowed the right to practice their religion without persecution. That's around 280 years of living in fear. It is impressive and enduring that even while living in the fear of death, churches began popping up around the Middle East, Southern Europe, and Northern Africa, and despite the harsh climate, they continued to grow and flourish. The second thing to keep in mind is that Paul is in Rome under house arrest while writing this letter. It wasn't too long ago that Paul was in charge, but now he is surrounded by soldiers, officials, and others who knew of his position with the Romans. I imagine these folks are thinking, oh, how the mighty have fallen, while looking at Paul's predicament. Paul and the Philippians were in community knowing that they would probably not live to see the second coming of Jesus. This letter could be viewed as a farewell to his beloved people and as motivation to keep going after his death. But another perspective, and I think one that we should probably keep in mind while we're reading this, is that this is written by someone in the margins, to people living on the margins of what society deemed correct and truthful. Although they had been written off, Paul, the Philippians, and the Way as a whole discovered a joy and truth that the condemnations of society could not dampen. While the letter to the Philippians is not written to the capital letter C church, it is written to those who make up the church. Saints, bishops, and deacons are borrowed terms from the cultural context of temples and relationships with the gods at the time. Saints were anyone devoted to the temple or any object devoted to the gods. Bishops included households, temples, merchants, and slave traders. Lastly, anyone who worked in or had a specific role in the temple or in the community's relationship with the gods were labeled deacons or ministers. That is why holding this communal perspective of being on the margin with the gods, and why that is so important to hold here. Because it's not just the church, capital letter C, and it's not just the leadership, it's all of us. Their ministry of community and companionship that explores the support given to one another through thick and thin, through danger and rejoicing. That ministry transcends time and can be found within our church DNA today. While the majority of Christians today are not persecuted, we do find the message of the gospel under fire by those who preach it with tangible returns expected. In the media and through certain groups, the message of the gospel is spread expecting people to suddenly believe and convert. The phrase collecting souls or tallies come to mind. But if we spread the message of the gospel expecting that, then that isn't the good news we've come to believe and receive and to love. God isn't given to you grace isn't given to you because you collected enough souls or because you reached a certain threshold of belief. No, it is freely given because we are God's beloved children, whether we believe it or not. That is why we act, spread, and believe in the gospel, because the good news of Christ's resurrection and hope is what gave our ancestors hope to keep going in the face of death, and because all people should have that message of hope. Over the past few days, I have seen firsthand what investing in the gospel without tangible returns look like through various events happening in our community. The LCS Holding Hope fundraiser, the spring cleanup, and the remembrance of Ina Ames all shared something together and something in common. As PK mentioned yesterday in her eulogy, the ministry of presence is powerful. At all three events, people showed up for the communities they cared about. They showed companionship through celebration and grief, through donating their time, money, or love for those they cared about. And we don't need to look much further than our sanctuary halls or narthex to see it every Sunday. Through smiles, peace, coffee, and laughs, throughout all the outreach ministry we do with members in our congregation in the larger community, and let's not forget the generosity to our church and the world around us. Now, these might seem like tiny things or normal things to do as being a part of a church, but what I have seen from all of you exceeds that. I mentioned it when I first got here and in my first newsletter, but the warmth and genuine care that I received when I got here was incredible and heartwarming. Oh, I didn't think I would cry at that, but I did. That is spreading the gospel without tangible returns expected. So whether it's pouring milk in each other's eyes, creating a community while under persecution, or showing warmth and care for new people, we are called as children of God to continue spreading the gospel of hope and resurrection, not out of duty, but out of love for one another. Thanks be to God.